Thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. I think we're live. Booyah. All right,
The
everybody.
process is
My name's
this.
Colin, and this is Guillermo. He's a geopolitics writer out of Spain and a total smart badass. So
Well, thank
welcome.
you.
So it also everyone should be sure to kind of go to his blog. I think it is linked, but it's called like the Outpost, and he has really thoughtful talks anytime
Yeah,
it's in the news. It's really smart.
yeah. Like the name is very hard to find on. If you look at it like if you Google it, it's not a very original name. So you will find like a movie that's called The Outpost about the war in Afghanistan or something like that, and I don't get any views from my name because of that. But and then if you link it in the description, then I'm sure
Do that.
you'll access it. Yeah.
Awesome. So like one thing I thought was like interesting is like when like there's most of the time when people talk about like geopolitics, it's like it's an American, it's like Peter Zeihan, and it feels like when a venture capitalist is talking their book, and they're always like talking about the investments they've already made. So it's like, yeah, North America's gonna be great. It's like, yeah, but you're also like American. So like one thing I think is really interesting to you is like you kind of you're bringing both like familiarity with kind of the whole world environment, but it's from like a perspective of Spain and like being Spain. Like what got you into geopolitics and like how did you get interested?
Okay. Like first, to address your first point,
Yeah.
uh, geopolitics is an Anglo-Saxon discipline. Like it was invented in Britain by geographers in the 19th century as a discipline. I mean, so it's a very Anglo thing. So it's understandable that like most of the discourse on geopolitics is in the English language, and it was directed against Russia mostly. So it's paradoxical that probably the most literate people, geopolitically literate people, are in Eastern Europe.
Whoa. Wait. It was invented by the Germans as a way to was it a way to slime Russia or like a way to convince Eastern Europeans to like ally against Russia? That sounds very
Uh, it's related. Like okay,
okay.
the guy who's considered to be the father of geopolitics is a British geographer called Halford Mackinder,
Oh,
which he's like he was a very famous guy from the 19th century. Again, and he belonged to the Royal Geographical Society or whatever name it was in Victorian England, and this guy described the world in several areas, and he found that the key to world power, and this is of course in a time where Britain was still a world power.
right.
The key to hold world power was to control what he called the heartland, which is like a point in the middle of Eurasia.
Oh yeah, it was like a world island and that
Yeah, like the world island thing. So it's at this time that Britain is, it has all its Indian subcontinent
Mhm.
colonies, and it's contesting the Russian advances in Afghanistan and in Central Asia,
So
because
like
this was the Wild West, Central Asia.
so in like kind of like I guess like as that like evolves then like what when you think about that now, like especially from like the perspective of Spain, like what is like the like when you're does every country actually have a grand strategy? Like does like okay. So like does Spain have a grand strategy right now, do you think?
I don't think it does.
Okay.
Like I can't really talk much about Spain,
Yeah.
but if I had to say where Spain is aligned, I would say it's definitely in the American side. Like
Yeah.
as most Western countries follow the American foreign policy.
Yep.
Like they may have some nuance and they may have some discrepancies, but as a bloc, they don't really, you know, pursue their own foreign policy.
Strategically like what's the grand strategy of Spain is like asking what the grand strategy of Maine is. It's
Sorry, what was
like
that?
like asking like kind of like what's the grand strategy of Spain is kind of like asking what the grand strategy of like Maine or like the North Carolina.
Yeah,
Everyone's
a little bit like that.
entity.
Yeah, like there is definitely some international interests, but it's nowhere near the scope of what America has.
So like if we take like Italy as like another one where it's kind of like you like I guess like I look at like a Singapore and like okay, you have like Singapore and you have a country where almost nothing going for it, but they get like Julius Caesar level talent out of nowhere. And then he like Lee Kuan Yew comes in, he rips it out, and like all of a sudden it's a financial center like 40 years later. Okay.
Yeah.
So like that's just like
a swamp.
Great man.
Like it was a horrible swamp, Singapore, before that.
Yeah, it was like literally rice paddies.
Yeah. There was
like,
nothing else there.
What do you think like if someone like if you had like a Lee Kuan Yew was born in Italy and was like 35 years old right now, like what do you think would be like a good highest aspiration?
Well, I think I'm not going to call it a problem, but the issue with European countries, especially old European countries like Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, is that they're in a way they are in a post-geopolitical phase. Because when geopolitics was invented, those countries were already way past their peak. Like Spain's peak was at the end of the 16th century as a world power. So world power politics were only formulated later. So all these power plays by Spain were not explicit in the way British policies were explicit in the 19th century. You know what I mean? I don't know if I.
No, you are. If geopolitics is like it's a relatively new invention, and that it's in Britain, that before Britain created this kind of concept, that states were not explicitly thinking about
exactly
to improve their standing in that way. And okay, so it was essentially unorganized.
Yeah, exactly, because Spain's conquest of the Americas, the conquistadors, they were just like poor guys, military veterans, because Spain Spain in the 15th century had just expelled the Moors from the Iberian Peninsula, and
so they had a military that
yeah, like they had, and it was overpopulated. Like if you travel through central Spain right now, it's empty. It's like it has super low density, but at the time it was overpopulated. Okay, so there was a lot of unemployed. Well, not unemployed because it was let's say jobless guys, military veterans usually, or people who had low nobility ranks, so they didn't want to work in the fields, and because they were above that. So all these all these types that really didn't have anything to do in the Iberian Peninsula didn't have anything to lose by traveling to America.
That's so interesting. Like go after Mars.
Yeah, it's like okay, so my father was a war hero and he expelled the Moors and he earned by war plunder this patch of earth, but this patch of earth, this patch of ground has been inherited by my older brother, and I don't want to be a priest and I don't want to work the fields of my older brother, so I'm just going to join a band of mercenaries and go to America because there is glory and there is money there. And
so besides the US has a strategy right now, and like Russia clearly has a strategy, like China has a strategy. Like, I mean, I guess like besides like Turkey, like within your framing, like what countries do you think like actually have a plan?
I mean, like countries do have plans. It's just that they're relatively small and non-influential plans compared to what China, Russia, or the United States can do. Right? Like France has definitely a plan.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, like you had this, the explosion in Beirut this summer.
Yeah.
It was actually on my birthday, and so I remember very clearly.
Yeah.
And there was all these theories and all these discussions whether it was a terrorist attack or whether it was an accident or whether it was the government to blame because they had stored these confiscated explosives and they kept them securely in Beirut's harbor. Whatever, it doesn't matter. The thing is that the only guys who were ready to bring aid in some way and who were like in the next following weeks, like in the next 2 or 3 weeks, President Macron traveled there and tried to make deals for trade agreements and those guys, French, the French have a responsibility in Lebanon because they were a colony there. Like the Lebanese, what is now Lebanon used to be a French colony.
But
So they have this notion of being a power player.
Like if we're like in the US, I feel like we think of like France as kind of, we just don't think about them. It's like in that kind of like very American sense of just kind of like not thinking about an entire, but it's like it seems like it's in my limited understanding. I feel like Macron has like a clearer strategy and is like more forceful than certainly like any American president since Reagan. And Reagan was acting in a kind of a weird globalist interest. I feel like Reagan was working not for the United States, but very much for NATO and kind of this transatlantic understanding, whereas Macron is playing for the home team. Like I feel like he's just playing for France.
Yeah, and the French they do that. Like it's not only Macron, because the France has nuclear warheads. Like it's a nuclear country, and countries that have nuclear weapons, they can afford to play their own cards better than countries that do not.
And like I read the Caspian report, I think, where they're talking about kind of like France and in Western Africa, and about how like everyone feels like there's decolonization in Africa, but the French were actually just did it as a PR strategy, and they were like super smart about it. They maintained all the financial ties. So if you're one of those West African countries, you're required to like have your gold with them. There's a lot of like weird currency relationships.
Yeah, definitely.
Huge outflows.
Yeah, like if you try to, I don't know, maybe like let's say you own an energy company and you want to provide the electrical grid for some town in Madagascar.
Right.
Like you're going to be in trouble with French companies who already do that. Like they control that market completely.
So
yeah, and the French actually are very advanced because they have this institute. It's like an intelligence agency. Well, they have many intelligence agencies, like a lot of countries, but they have a specific one for economic intelligence.
Wait,
so like they help a lot their entrepreneurs, and if you're a French millionaire who wants to open up and do business in Indonesia, they will help you and they will get you in contact with people there, and so you're not alone. It's very efficient, and Spain does not have that, or England does not have that. So they're going to have that.
We prosecute countries for bribery, which is crazy.
What was that? Sorry.
We prosecute countries for bribery, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Like you're not even trying to compete when like you're like prosecuting for like international bribery. Like because so in France, so it's not just that the companies can bribe. It's not just that they can go aggressively into it. Is that there's like literally an intelligence agency dedicated to feeding them espionage, telling them like who, like, so like if you're in a contract negotiation in Indonesia as a French company, like do you have like a liaison officer who's like feeding you intelligence on the counterparty?
I don't know, but I mean there is an intelligence agency that does that kind of thing, so I would not be surprised. Like the aim of that intelligence agency is to help French economic activity abroad. So that would make sense. Like
That's so smart.
Yeah.
Like, but it feels like that's a very alien way of thinking about the world, because I feel like the U.S. like I'm curious what your view is, like, because like I feel like the U.S. we had our kind of our external propaganda, which was great for like attracting immigration. Because I feel like
Mhm.
part of like U.S. strategy is that we want to basically like innervate the rest of the world. We want to take the most ambitious people from the rest of the world. We want to take the wealthiest people from the rest of the world, and then we want to move them and their families and their bloodlines into the U.S. And then they're part of the American gene pool, and then we leave only the people that didn't move to the U.S. already. So
Mm.
like all the places that we recruit from slowly have less ambitious people because we're constantly poaching. And
Yeah.
then kind of like parallel to that,
It's a
it's
brain
like
drain.
total brain drain. It's like it's brain drain as like it's as a national strategy, but we present it as this positive propaganda piece when it's incredibly aggressive.
Yeah, like there's even a, Spanish humor is very self-deprecating, and there is a Spanish very bad comedy movie called Brain Drain,
Yeah.
and it's about these idiots who like village idiots who fall in love with a girl and then fake their way, and they don't go to America. I think they go to England, but like they fake their diploma or something, and they go to Oxford to follow this girl, and they're like super stupid, and they just like stupid shenanigans happen all the time. But it's very typical. Like the concept is very deeply ingrained in European culture that if you're successful, you go to America.
But there's something really because governments don't treat that as like an existential assault on their demographics.
I
That's
mean,
why
it's a
I don't
problem.
understand why Europe trusts the US so much. Like we're like poaching their best people like very aggressively. And yet like Europe like has like generally positive feelings towards the US. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated relationship, really, because the US is it's also a guarantee of stability in the West in
Right.
general, right?
Yep.
So like that's the price you pay. This is all this all happened after World War II, uh, when Europe completely lost its strategic autonomy,
Totally.
because it was Germany. West Germany was an occupied country completely by the US,
So
and it
it's
was
like
there like until the 90s.
yeah, and it's like but it's interesting because like the US claim right now, which I kind of generally agree with, is that like is that the US is paying all this money for kind of like quote unquote defense, but you know it's enabling European social welfare through taxes on Americans by making
Yeah,
so Americans
completely.
don't need to pay for defense. Like true. At the same time, though, it's like we're also like kind of using that position to poach
Exactly.
Europeans. So it's like we're Europe, as we're talking about, I have topics for now, but it feels like Europe is sacrificing the next 1,000 years of its civilization for like 50 years of a Pax Americana, because we're poaching people and families, and they're getting a temporary security guarantee that can be like
Mhm.
removed over a weekend.
Yeah.
It's terrible trade.
I mean, you know, governments are not necessarily very keen on, you know, on long-term planning. Like not to that long term. Like the Chinese Communist Party, for instance, they don't have to care about elections. They don't care about anything like that.
Yep.
So they can afford to plan 20, 30 years ahead, 30 years ahead. But Germany does not in that sense. Nor does the US, really.
Right. So I guess it's like this might be a terrible example, but I'd argue that so it's like China's lockdown policy was like devastating for China. But because it's communist and because everyone there's already used to it, it's not that damaging for China. But like lockdown is like insanely destabilizing for like Western countries. Like Western
Yeah.
countries can't really survive lockdown. Like the economies can't survive it. It doesn't fit with the culture. It's devastating. So like China exporting lockdown policy it does hurt them, but it hurts everyone else more. Like, I wonder if like the American system, it's completely unable to plan more than like 8 hours ahead of time. But because we're in a position in North America, because we have so much power, because we have so many resources, because we're constantly raiding the rest of the world for talent, we have the ability to kind of like survive that level of incompetent planning. But then we
Yeah, I mean, I think agree.
Does that take it?
Oh, sorry, what was that?
Oh, like but like our exported system seems to like devastate the countries that adopt it.
Culturally, in a sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you know, I think the strength of them. This is going to be sunny, to sound very funny because it sounds like a woke slogan, but really, diversity in America is a strength. Not in the sense of like the diversity people who say these kind of things are thinking about, but in the sense that it's very difficult to deal critical damage to the United States because it's so different and so it's like an amalgamation of different things and different cultures and different structures that it's very difficult to find a critical point where you can hit and completely destroy the thing.
Totally.
It'll just, you know, it's very resilient.
Yeah.
It's individualistic and, you know, like it's, if you go to, I like most of my experience of America has been in the Midwest. But I have a sister who lives in California, and I know for a fact that it doesn't have anything to do. Like, it's a completely different experience of America. And that's very rich. That's a very, like, that I think that's an advantage, strategic advantage, definitely.
And it's like also it's like I guess it's like we have this landscape, we have this like this North American territory, and it's massive. And I always love like those population maps when it shows the spikes where population is, and it's like it's gonna take like 1,000 years.
I'm curious, where are you from? Like, where are you?
Oh, I'm from like Washington State originally, so kind of like, and then right now I'm in North Carolina, but most of the time I've been kind of like New England or New York.
Oh, really? I've been in North Carolina.
It's pretty nice. It's like very it's interesting. It's like it's not an ambitious area. Like it's not somewhere where people are like aggressive like in the bigger cities, but it's actually like the lifestyle is very similar to like 1950s, where it's like people can afford houses and families, and it's very family oriented.
Can you imagine affording a house? Can you imagine affording a house?
That's like, yeah, no, exactly. So it's like everyone here is just kind of like, and like a little bit crazy is all these people from New York move, and they're like amazed you can buy a house for under $700,000, like blown away.
I cannot fathom it really, because in Spain it's impossible to buy a house.
How much is a house?
Like in Madrid, for instance, a flat, like a 90 square meter flat, can cost you easily 300,000 euros.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's very expensive. Like I mean, I'm sure San Francisco is more expensive, but
yeah. How do you think about that for your own like just like life and career? Like, because it's just like I feel like that's like something everyone's like has to reason about is like how do you like when there's that big of a mismatch for houses, like how do you kind of raise a family? Like what's how have you been thinking about that?
and that's a huge problem because people cannot afford to have families, right? Like there's a huge population crisis looming over the horizon that nobody seems to pay attention to. And you know, the European Union's policy is to solve that through immigration.
Yep.
But you know, that brings its own set of trouble also. So the fact that families cannot afford to have children is very problematic.
Yeah. No, it's like when in like kind of my context, kind of like in the kind of a tech industry context, it's like there's kind of the brute force approach to it, which is like, okay, well, I just need to try to figure out ways to make money. It's like strategizing about that, but like from like a capital standpoint, like a multi, like because I'll try to think about things in terms of like a multi-year like like skill stack and like code, like how do I kind of like pick up skills that are gonna be like add in value over time, and like hopefully that adds up personally to be able to kind of like do things like have a big family. But it's like that's batshit crazy. Like it's insane that like to have a family of 4, you need to be like strategizing with M&A. That's dumb.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. No, it's not sustainable at all. Like I don't know. When I was in North Carolina, I was visiting a friend in Wake Forest, and
Yeah.
he was like he was a friend from medical school, and he was doing research on like there is an institute for regenerative medicine in Wake Forest,
Mm-hmm.
which does like awesome stuff, and they grow ears out of tissue scaffold. I don't know, crazy biotechnology stuff, right? And it's amazing. This guy, this friend of mine who came from Spain and didn't have anything there to, he just finished medical school and then he was very interested in their program.
Mm-hmm.
So he just wrote an email and said, "Hey, I'm this, and I'm 24 years old, and I'm very interested in what you do. So can I go there and participate in some way?" And they said, "Yeah, sure, come along." And he flew there, and then they arranged for him, like a place to live, and I mean they didn't pay for it. Like he had to spend his own money
Yeah.
to live, but it was very easy to make something significant of his life because people were, you know, betting on that Wake Forest project. So this Wake Forest project could afford to bring some guy from Spain who they didn't know nothing about, and help him find a place to live and help him buy a car, and you know see if he could do anything of value. And then he did his PhD there, and he stayed for 4 years. So
Did he stay in the US or did he go back to Spain?
he's in Spain now because he wanted to do his specialty training. So like I don't think you can do that in Spain or in France. Like if you write to a Spanish university right now and say you're interested in their program and you want to join, and it's going to be a bureaucratic nightmare.
And then I'll tell you that between the different programs, you can't really reason about a future. Like, isn't youth unemployment like 50% in Spain or 30%?
Can you repeat that, sorry?
Oh yeah, like isn't like youth unemployment in like is like 30 or
Yeah,
40%? Man, it's something insane.
almost 50 in some places.
Jesus.
Yeah,
Like
it's horrible. I have this other friend from medical school also, and he studied psychology. He's 34 years old, and he's been working in for 8 years, yeah, in a lab doing data science for neural mapping and stuff like super advanced, cool things, and he makes less than 2,000 euros a month.
it doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, like he has to live with another friend who's also a physicist and who also makes like that kind of money because
That's it's like I just think about that in the US context where I feel like the US is just starting to hit those same kind of issues. And like especially with lockdown, you had like a lot of people that are young. And I know kind of like, friends that kind of they have like family members that kind of like got laid off or they were going to college and they got screwed by it. And you first off, you have like people that are smoking pot like crazy. And there's like smoking all day long, the STEMI stuff got like normalized really, really fast. But people became hopeless so quickly, and like people had their level of ambition decline so quickly. But like, and it feels like there's like some of those same early things that are going on in Spain, but I feel like the difference is that like there was like armed threatening demonstrations against lockdown policy within like weeks, and like
Yeah,
1 year into the curve like there's like come like a Instagram insurrection, and like you start seeing like a level of political instability so quickly after decline becomes obvious that like Americans will tear down the system. I feel like before it gets that
yeah,
far,
that's
you know what
that's what
I
I
mean?
meant. Like,
The system will have to respond or it'll be torn down. Like this can't escalate for another 10 years. But like it's how long has like the unemployment been that high for like people in Spain? Like and to pay that low. 2000
like
science is insane.
For like maybe not this high, but it has been super high like for all my adult life. Like probably since I can remember.
How?
Like, I mean, when the financial crisis hit in 2008, I was 16 years old, and I haven't seen it recover since, right? Because so I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty hopeless horizon, but
yeah, it's kind of like in the U.S. context, it's like the 2008 hit, and like yeah, unemployment went down, but unemployment got better. But it's like the debt load increased. It's like nothing immediately fell apart. Like nothing immediately exploded, and like entertainment prices like plummeted with like kind of streaming and video games. So that can like help keep the wheels on the car, I feel like. But like now it seems like in the US it's like starting to get to the point where it's no longer sustainable. And it's also like but in Spain, like I mean it's like also like or like have like any European country that has like the same like unemployment level, like
Italy is
it's
the same.
interesting how non-extreme politics are. Because I know like everyone talks about extremist the
They're
party. It's not that extreme.
No, it's not extreme, but it's like they're very old countries.
Yep.
Like you can feel this in Italy too. Italy is completely dysfunctional. Have you ever been there?
No, I want to, but like it's gonna be a shit show.
I've been there like very few times, but it's fascinating because nothing works, but it's still fantastic. Like people really do not care. People do not care enough to start a revolution against the government in Italy.
Yeah,
that's over. Like that happened once in the 1930s, and it's not gonna happen again for a long, long time.
do you think?
I think it's not in the culture anymore. I could be surprised, and
yeah, because it's kind of like the lesson they're gonna take from like the 30s and Mussolini was like don't ally against the Anglosphere. Like I feel like there's kind of like I don't know, like it's just I think about like if I were like an Italian, it would be so tempting to look back on that as the last time there was hope and a vision and something forward looking, and doesn't matter how fucked up the details were. Like
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like it's like
Really. But okay, like
decline forever.
Okay, like in for the last 4 years in the US, you had Trump,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to turn on the light. Is it better like this? Too shiny?
Oh hell yeah! Oh dude, good move.
I done that earlier. Sorry. And okay, so we're talking about Trump. Okay,
Yeah.
whatever your opinions on Trump is, in the words of Putin, he was a colorful character, right? Like
Yes.
he did a ton of crazy stuff, but whatever he did is nothing compared to what Berlusconi from Italy did.
Oh.
Like you can go to YouTube and watch like Berlusconi best moments.
Oh, they're awesome.
Yeah, it's bonkers. I mean, he's a complete buffoon, right?
And what either, because it did seem like like one thing is like kind of like Trump, he's a jackass, he's a vile person, like blah blah. But like it's like almost everything he did was relatively strategic. You can disagree with the strategy, but it's like a lot of the stuff it was spazzy and execution would be shit, but there'd be like a plan behind it, which to disagree or agree with. But it seemed like Berlusconi was a buffoon without a plan.
Yeah, I mean, he was all about the cokes and the hooker, about the coke and hookers, right? Like he.
It's like the bourgeois, like the bourgeois back in, but like for the PM.
Yeah, and it's like I don't know. No, there were some. Of course, it's not the same across the Mediterranean, right? Because you had Greece, and Greece, nobody protests like the Greeks, right? So
Yep.
the kind of instability that you can find in Greece is not the same that you can find in Italy. But also, Greece has a border with Turkey, and it's already a different world. and they suffer geopolitics more than Western European countries.
Yeah, and it's like there doesn't seem to be. It goes back to like your point about just kind of that none of these states can plan, but like Greece is a state that desperately needs to be able to plan.
Yeah,
Like they have real like Turkey will conquer them. They're not going to be nice about it. Like it's like they've done it before, they'll do it again. Like unless they're able to defend themselves. And like, did you see the thing where Israel signed an agreement with Turkey about the waters around Cyprus?
yeah.
Like, okay, so it's like now we have like what was like the like in like if Israel and Turkey both decide that it would be in their interest to remove the Greek claims on the energy in the Eastern Mediterranean, like I just don't know. Like, I mean, like Germany doesn't even have a military anymore. France doesn't really care. If anything, I feel like France would be more aligned with Israel
I
and
mean,
Turkey.
that was the complaint of Greece, that nobody in the European Union or in NATO cared about their problems in their
Yep.
neighborhood, and that's exasperating for them. And it's the same for many countries in the European Union that do not feel represented by the organization's policies.
So where do you think like everything about it seems like I feel like I very clearly see the US trajectory where it feels like it's like a standard late republic. Like it feels like it's a very boring, cut and dry late republic where there's like still ambition in the country, there's incredible value in the territory, and like things will kind of do a slow decline up until like the system turns over. And the nice thing with the Constitution for all the problems with it is that it makes it really easy to present a revolution as being legal because you just as long as you can just like pass an amendment, you can remake the entire thing and it's perfectly within the balance. So it's like the US has like a nice revolutionary, a legalistic revolution mechanic.
Yeah,
That
it's in their it's in your DNA, right?
totally
And like the revolution is it's a virtue in post Enlightenment countries in a
right.
different way than it is in older countries like England or Spain.
Well, like
That
most history is like that places don't just give up. Like if we're like kind of like zooming out to like 250 years, it's like the idea that kind of Europe would just kind of like stay just kind of like head in the sand. It's all going to be okay as like unemployment goes up and like the America's like poaching the talent. And like then like there's like serious threats like kind of China and Turkey like looming right over the border.
Mhm.
Like it just feels like at some point like it's more likely that all of Europe gets conquered by Russia than it's able to just like I just don't see how it's stable to
I
be
don't,
this.
I don't think it's gonna happen like it did in the last century. Like countries do not conquer each other like that anymore. You're not going to see armor divisions, running over the Vistula River or anything like that.
Why though? Like a weird 50-year period. And like all of human history, like up until the last like 70 years, is conquest and taxation. So like I don't know. I'm just like very dubious about the whole idea that like it's a new it's and in tech every single time there's a new technology, it's a new economy. The rules don't apply, right? You don't actually need to have like profitable user acquisition, and then the whole
Mhm.
thing unfolds 5 years later. Like it's just like it's never a new economy, right? So my bias is kind of like it's never a new humanity. Like we kind of like conquer each other.
Yeah, I mean, uh, we do that, but the way it happens is very different. Like we had this in this summary in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. This was conventional warfare,
Yep.
but it was not in the scale that campaigns in the 1940s happened. It simply doesn't work that way anymore.
Wouldn't you have made the same argument in the 1920s though?
I don't think though. I don't think so because military technology hadn't changed that much.
I see.
Like
Well,
like between the end of the First World War and the beginning of the second one,
yep,
doctrine it had evolved, but not that much.
that's fair. Like what? But like, okay, but I guess like if we're looking at like conquest, like I mean, China feels like a good counterpoint because like China is like actively committing ethnic cleansing, replacing a native population in the Uyghur territories, and then also in Tibet with native Hans, and it'll be like 70-80% Han within like 15 years, and then just from just intermarriage, like those cultures go away. Like that's a very like it's fucked up. It's a very successful conquest. It's
Yeah,
and
but I don't think
by technology.
like I mean maybe the spirit of conquest is there, but
Yeah,
I I'm not sure uh, about it happening the way uh, we're being told it is happening. Like there is Uyghur concentration camps in Western China, probably. Like I haven't seen them, but I think it's reasonable to believe there are. But I don't think they are like you know like the kind of concentration camps you had
I agree.
in Poland in the 30s, in the 40s, right? From like German Nazi concentration camps in
Or the
Poland.
American Japanese,
Hmm?
or the
Or
American Japanese. I think that like that
exactly.
was, all Japanese were interned in the U.S. In our concentration camps, and then in the Chinese ones, it seems like it is everyone's allowed. Like Uyghurs are they're as soon as you get a traffic ticket is kind of my understanding.
Mhm.
Then you're sent to it, but it's not everyone is forced in right away.
Yeah, and it's not. It's like they are truly re-education camps. Like I think they brainwash people more than anything. It's not like they. It's not an extermination program. It's more like an assimilation program.
Interesting. That's interesting. So, because my understanding has been that they're kind of shipping in a lot of Han Chinese, and then they're kind of like they're taking especially the men kind of just like off so that they can't build wealth, that they can't get married, they can't have kids, and that it's like trying to shift the demographics to be like 70%, 80% of ethnic Han. Like, do you think that's the case?
I have no idea, really.
Okay.
Like I would be talking out of my ass, but
Yeah.
uh, I mean, these kind of things do happen, but they are more nuanced than it might seem. Like my family, my father is he's from Poland,
Yep.
okay, and my ancestors come from what used to be Eastern Poland, that is now the Ukraine,
Hmm.
but they were ethnic Poles. So after World War II, Poland's border shifted because the USSR took a lot of what used to be Eastern Poland and turned it into the USSR, and they gave Poland some German lands from Eastern Germany that became Poland. So they moved all the German population that were living in Eastern Germany, they expelled them, and they repopulated those areas with Poles that were from, Polish territories that were now the USSR.
Like mutual.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, it was like mutual ethnic cleansing. Like the Ukrainians committed ethnic cleansing against the Poles in the new Ukrainian area, but then the Poles did the same against the Ukrainians. So just kind
Like,
of
and after all these ethnic, like during the war, there was a lot of violent ethnic cleansing, but after this, it was just
it was
mass displacement of population. So my father grew up in a village that had Poles from all the Polish diaspora. Like there were Bulgarian Poles, Ukrainian Poles, Belarusian Poles, German Poles, Russian Poles, Lithuanian Poles, and they were all living in what used to be Eastern Germany. And you know, for a while, like they were given a house that used to be a German house, and this was not right away. So for a few months, they were living with a German family that was had to leave their house.
whoa, you lost the war.
Yeah, like you lose the war. So they bring a new family that they're going to live with you in your house for a while. And after a few months, they finally find accommodation for the Germans in Germany. So they're taken to East Germany, right?
Mhm.
And, I mean, this is definitely awkward.
Say the least. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not exactly violent in the sense that, these people who are living under the same roof had to find some accommodation.
No, I totally agree. I guess, yeah, I guess it's like, yeah, and that's I guess what I mean with like kind of I guess in the same as like the weaker stuff is like is that it the pro like there's been so many incidents. I mean, like after World War One, you have the kind of the Greeks and the Turks have a war, and part of the
Mhm.
settlement of the war is mutual ethnic cleansing. They're going to deport all of each other's nationals, even though there'd been Greeks living in Turkey and in Anatolia, not Turkey, Anatolia, going
Mhm.
back literally thousands of years, and then there'd been Turks living in kind of some of the Greek cities, for hundreds of years, and that was violent, but it wasn't that violent. I think it was about the same violence level as kind of like the deportations you're talking about. Nowhere
Mhm.
near as violent as a partition of India, which was certainly ethnic cleansing. It was just kind
Yeah.
of this ethnic cleansing. So like I feel, but it's like, so why is it that none of those things resonate in like the consciousness? But it's like because as soon as I feel like it's actually like the world opinion is actually entirely okay with brutal deportations and ethnic cleansing, and that's actually been like a very common thing over the past 100 years. But it's that the Nazis went the next step to actually murdering everyone, and then that turns into like this kind of like this massive cultural event as like the definition of evil. So it's like if you're kind of China, you're looking at it. If you actually start murdering the Uyghurs,
Mhm.
then you have Schindler's List made. And the second Schindler's List is made, you're culturally fucked for like 50 years. Like the Germans, after that
Yeah.
movie's made, they're not going to recover from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, okay. Yeah. I see your point. Right. I understand now what you're what you're saying. But this happened in the Balkans too in the 90s.
Much more violent. Yeah, that's closer on the spectrum. I feel like
This is
to
it was super violent. Like I know veterans from that conflict, and they're and it was especially violent because it was not like, well, not especially violent, but especially gruesome or cruel because it was not like anonymous and aseptic, and like they were neighbors killing neighbors, and so it was not like these foreign guys who you don't know from 500 miles away that are coming into your house with uniforms and murdering you. It's like the neighbor from the next house who is a different religion, or from the different village that is a different.
you're starting with transgression. You're starting with like one of the worst taboo transgressions you can do, which is like neighbors are supposed to look out for each other. So if
Yeah.
like the opening move of the conflict is neighbors killing neighbors, like you've escalated so high from the beginning on what's acceptable, like you're not coming back.
Mm. Like how can you forgive that?
You don't ever, like
Never.
ever, hundreds of years, never.
Yeah. Especially in places that are so, like their identity is so well constructed through years and years and years and centuries of this kind of relations.
And I guess it's like that we look back at the past 100 years, and first off, we see that even though there's this idea that borders aren't moving as much, like clearly they are. Like we can look at the Balkans as just like the population movements, like
Mm-hmm.
movement, like displacements, ethnic cleansing, whatever the phrase is. It's like massive. What's going on, not in terms of border changes, but demographic changes and kind of like the Uyghur and the Tibetan areas, where it's like those are going to become like Han occupied territory probably for hundreds of years. Like both of those have been problem areas for the Chinese going back, I think like 1,000 years, and those were like major strategic threats. And so the Chinese government, they have the power right now. There's no threats in the neighborhood, and they have a long lens. So they are willing to have, mean tweets from Ted Cruz for any number of years if they're able to remove a strategic threat, and they're going to, and no one's going to do anything about it. And then like in Europe, it's like that kind of, we know that even 20 years ago there was like that kind of like internal, there was kind of like the Balkans War,
Mm.
that we know that kind of unemployment is growing, and we know that each of the governments it's essentially the same regime kind of across all of Europe. It's like very like
Yeah,
tonally, aesthetically the same. And none of them are providing much hope. Like Macron at least is kind of like masculine, and he kind of has like a masculine aesthetic, which is good, but
in a sense,
it's,
yeah. Very
yeah,
French masculine, yeah.
yeah. So it's like, I guess the thing is, it's just like, it feels like it feels so similar to the 20s, where like
Right, we're in the 20s.
yes, I think we're in the 20s, because like it just seems like and particularly in Europe we're in the 20s, I feel like, because like the Italians had been a joke for so long up until Mussolini came in. And like, it's like like Mussolini's like autobiography, the foreword was written by the American ambassador to Italy. Like the degree to which the Anglo kind of like leadership embraced Mussolini is like, it's been kind of memory hold in a very, very, very big way. So it's like, it feels like something's going to break, because like some country is going to kind of like get ambitious again.
Yeah, but you can get ambitious, but then you need to have the means to drive that ambition somewhere, right? Like, the civil war in Spain happened
Mhm.
because they had reached this point of complete breakdown of the political system, and nobody believed in it anymore. But
Mhm.
also, everybody there knew how to shoot a gun, and some were veterans from the Morocco campaigns. So they were a completely different stock from what you have now. Like, okay, so uh, there's a there has been constant unrest in European cities for a long time now, because every summer Paris neighborhoods burn down, and every summer there's riots in Catalonia because of the separatist movement, and like you can get all these unrest, but people do not have the capacity to go the next step.
You describe like the Byzantine Empire. So okay, so is the argument, this is really interesting. So is the argument then that essentially like Europe is the Byzantine Empire, which it's kind of like there's unrest occasionally, but for the most part, like everyone is so kind of just like flaccid that like
Yeah,
there's a good chance of like everyone just kind of accept their lot in life, and there will be occasional uprisings, and then kind of the state comes in, and the state's powerful enough to maintain its power, but weak to like the Byzantines were never able to really put down the Persians. It's just that kind of,
yeah, like it's okay, you can burn some cars, things are going to break down, and there is going to be insecurity in cities. Okay, but uh, who's going to come up with a big idea and say, okay, I'm going to change the world, follow me? And he's going to turn people into soldiers or political advocates with such strong convictions that they're going to risk their families or their comfort for anything.
true. Yeah, because I guess like when you have a country becomes like ambitious, it's kind of like it's a 0 to 1. I guess
Yeah,
maybe this is the argument, is that you like the Neo-Assyrian Empire is never as big of a deal as the Assyrian Empire, but you only kind of get that redo once. So it's kind of like, Americans come to America and are instantly kind of like doing a big push, and then there's a lot of easy narratives for renewal. There's an easy narrative of renewal for, the problem is just the government, because like all of our corporations are still dominant. So it's very easy to say the political system's the problem. We're going to have like a renewal based on whatever, there's constitutional amendment, boom. Or even just like if the whole country just like became like a loose federation again, there's 50 states, renewal, boom, new period. There's a lot of easy narratives for
yeah,
renewal. But like I feel like if like the Romans, they had the kind of the one-time renewal narrative of, okay, we can blame the system, and now we have our god emperor Augustus that'll lead us into the future. And then the second renewal is all of our problems is a city of Rome because the Romans are lazy and the senators are terrible, so we're going to move to Constantinople, and that'll be good because that's near like the riches of the East. And like there's this renewal narrative, but like they couldn't have done a second Augustus. You only get to play that card once.
Yeah, I love how you put it, because I think narrative is really at the core of what world power politics is all about, really. Because like that's what I try to do in my blog. Essentially, I you know, all the facts that I describe in my posts are real, but they are a selection of facts.
Yes.
Because it's impossible to write down everything that's going on. Right. So when you try to describe what's going on in geopolitics, you need, in a way, to write a story that makes sense internally, and then using that story, you can model reality, and you can play with reality. So the model is useful because you can do things with it, but it's not necessarily the whole truth.
Right. Not just narratives. Casting countries of millions and hundreds of millions, even billions, as characters, and then casting their geographies as characters and telling stories about like the interplay.
Yeah, and like you can paint America and you can describe it as through the narrative of the British Empire, and portray America as as the heir of the British Empire once the British Empire failed, and American imperialism is just the new version of British imperialism, and they're like Anglos LARPing as Romans, and this is one interpretation of America.
Love that.
And yeah, and you can make sense of the world using that model, and do things with it. Like if you are a communist country that's a communist leader in some country that wants to rise against imperialism, then that narrative is useful to you, and it's not entirely fake and it's not entirely right, because there is like America is the country of the Ku Klux Klan, and it's also the country of Martin Luther King, and they're yeah, like both things are quintessentially American.
Totally. Yeah. There's no meaningful difference between Andrew Jackson and Hitler. They're the same person. Like or like Genghis Khan, right? It's just like you actually go into like what Andrew Jackson did to the Indians. Like it was we converted the American people into a Mongol horde that devastated an entire continent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a way to portray Andrew Jackson, and it's true. And then you can, omit those facts and use some other facts. And he was the builder of a civilization, and there's nothing wrong with him.
Absolutely, yeah.
Both of them are, in a sense, true.
Totally.
Right. So you're Donald Trump, and you enter the presidency, and you hang the portrait of Andrew Jackson in your office because you're trying to play with that narrative.
Totally.
And you could have done it the other way around, and it would still be. It would still make sense, let's say.
Yeah, that's also like the thing that worries me most about the U.S. is like we've lost the ability to control our narrative, and
there's just so many narratives in the U.S.
Totally. And like in the past, we had like much more effective state propaganda. Like we had much more effective indoctrination, like kind of in classes. And like there's this kind of one-way door we walk through with the internet, where the indoctrination no longer works because people are Googling in real time. And the propaganda no longer works because like the meat puppet presenters reading their scripts are no longer believed. Like no one smart, at least, like trust a Rachel Maddow or like a Sean Hannity or anyone like reading that stuff, or like an Anderson Cooper. Like, but people actually trusted newscasters 70 years ago. They had no idea they were going out for dinner with the same people.
But I don't really know if they really, like, everybody trusted them, because we only know the stories of those who trusted them.
Fair point. I mean, the narrative of trust is itself a narrative.
Yeah, exactly. So like, like the stories of German Americans from the early 20th century, during like the years prior to World War One, and the years after World War One are completely different, because German Americans were a huge majority, and German was spoken in a big part of the U.S. And then during the war, there was this huge anti-German propaganda campaign in America. So they erased all that German American heritage.
They became American.
I mean, so they invented an America that was not German.
Totally.
And that narrative is the one that stuck, but could have been different, and we will never know. So we will never know if, like, German Americans, did they believe the propaganda the government issued against them?
Oh, great point. Did they? Right. That's such a great point. 100% right. Because in our narrative, we're like, they were patriotic Americans that realized that they need to defend their country against the evil, right? But of course, the cost to them socially and economically and politically, if they'd done anything to align with like their German heritage, would have been disastrous. So you're right. It's just kind of like, maybe actually, if you go back into the details, the reality of that situation is more like the narrative of the Uyghurs, where it's actually like that you have this re-education camp and you have to identify as American, or you're not going to be employable above a certain level.
Yeah, like it's a very funny thing to me is that a lot of the southwestern U.S. Was during during the golden era of the Far West movies, portrayed as a wild place and the frontier, and there's this narrative of these, natives who are savages, and they, fight the cavalry, and there's all these stories. But all these people, they had already had huge contacts with the Spanish for centuries, essentially. Yeah, because you have Geronimo is a Spanish name. Right? I mean, like, there is this plains Indian thing in the movies, that they go on horses and they hunt buffaloes, and they portray them as this horse culture, but the horse had been in America for a very short time historically.
Totally. It had only been like 150 years or something since the introduction.
Yeah, something like that. So it's like a myth. It's a complete myth. And this narrative of America, of Americans, cowboys conquering the West, and in a sense it was very wild, the Wild West, but it was not uncharted territory.
For sure. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. It was very important to present it as being uncharted territory, because it's much easier to seize land and distribute. I mean, to your example about kind of, your father, and kind of like, there's that German house. That's a much easier narrative. That's a much easier narrative if it's presented as an untamed wilderness.
Yeah. And the point I'm trying to get across is that, for the people who were living those times, like for the real cowboys and the real homesteaders, maybe our narratives of the Wild West would sound ridiculous.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, like if you show a real homesteader a movie like True Grit, and he's going to say, okay, this is realistic, but maybe this is not so realistic, and oh no, this was not this way, and this was not that way. So like the experience of the conquest of the frontier will never be known to us, because we cannot just imagine what it is.
Literally unknown. And and that's kind of like, there's we kind of have gone through like a one-way door, because now there's so much information about what's happening minute by minute. Like, I'm sure there'll be historians that have a single year as their professional focus in the future, right? Like, or for a single country in a single year, because there's so much digital information to go to. But they're like, then they have to specialize, like, oh no, but I'm going to be like focusing on like, the Bernie Bros for, this 1 year. That could be like a viable career.
Yeah, but then the problem will be that, everything that is outside of the internet will just not be recorded.
Great. Yep.
Yeah, so it's going to disappear. So, and this is what happened to the Spanish experience in the, in what is now the US, that it's just forgotten completely. And now a lot of the Spanish nationalism is trying to make a lot of like a big thing out of it, and they're trying to revive the stories of the conquistadors, and they're trying to build these stories through historical records, but there is no way to know what we don't know.
Yes, and there's also like there's a big attempt in the U.S. with kind of like Hispanic identity politic types to like kind of like try to revive this major like Latinx and like all this stuff. And the thing that's so fascinating is the degree to which it's failing, because very similar to the German experience that you were describing, it's like an increasing percentage of Hispanic Americans are just identifying as white, which is basically a byword for generically American.
Yeah.
So it's right. And then there's like high degrees of intermarriage, just like with kind of like Asians and Indians. So like kind of it's like Hispanics in America, that's been kind of like a large population now for 70 years. So it feels like now in the same way, kind of Italians and Germans and Jews integrated into that kind of like Central American identity. Mm-hmm. Now, to the great horror of the identity politics people kind of that are kind of going there from a Hispanic lens in the US, like the demographics are, I feel like the demographics in the US are against the racists in a very deep way. And it's also against the racial identitarians from any given faction.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. They're all fucked.
Yeah. It's not going to last.
And it's going to happen to kind of like Indians and Asians. Like it'll be like another 100, 150 years. But you layer in kind of the intermarriage rates and you project that out for another X generations. And it's, even though I think there's going to continue to be like this kind of national insecurity around the word white, which we're going to export to the rest of the world. I love that. Black Lives Matter in Japan is just hilarious. That like we're going to keep on exporting that. But like at the end, I feel like, did you watch Battlestar Galactica?
I haven't. No.
Okay. There's like this thing. It's like set in the future, so they just call the women sir.
Oh, really?
And I'm just like, and I saw that, I'm like, that is such a great solution, because the problem is like ma'am has all the wrong narrative and connotation.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the right thing. So if you just call women sir, you're actually solving a series of very complicated gender politics issues in a very tight way. So I always thought that's like, it's like if people just adopted that sci-fi show, it would solve a lot of problems. But I feel like in the same way, right now the narrative is essentially that like white supremacy, white. And I feel like it's like the American thing so far has been that you would have racism of the Northern and the Western Europeans against the Southern Europeans, because the Southern Europeans weren't really white. So the actual American narrative around identity is just continuously expanding the word white.
Yep.
And it's a little bit of a mind fuck, because like, when you can just imagine how pissed people are going to be in 100 years when, Japanese and Chinese and Indians and Pakistanis are considered, entirely normally white in the same way as Italians are today.
Right.
Like, it's just a long-term solution. It's not interesting in the short term.
Yeah, because there's like a polemic right now going on, right? About some guys who like, I heard there was like an elderly man. I think he was Vietnamese American, and he was murdered. And then they said the fault was white supremacy or something like that.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine that happening. Really.
It was just like, it was like hilariously transparent horseshit, but it fit within the narrative, and it's a narrative where unquestionably repeating the thing that's obviously dumb kind of supports the in-group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's also very interesting because, these things are cyclical, because Italians were not considered wholly white in the beginning, but, Italians have had contact with Northern Europeans since forever.
Yep.
There was not, none of those issues were existent in, Elizabethan England. Like all these Italian musicians that traveled to England and made incredible advances in Baroque music. Those people, I cannot imagine them as experimenting racism from the English.
Totally. Yeah.
So, and then 200 or 300 years later, they travel to New York, and then they are not considered white. It's super strange.
It's super strange, but it's kind of funny because it's kind of like I think a lot of it's that the U.S. reduced racism down to a low enough level that it was possible for all of the minority groups to discover how fun it is to be racist and how many great benefits there are for it. Because as like white Americans had known for a long time that like by kind of like trying to do like racist laws, and by doing this you can actually gain a lot of power for your racial group, and you can actually add a lot of benefits for your neighbors, and it's actually a cool local tactic. So like kind of there's something in the 70s and the 60s where like the boomers all agreed that like we're kind of like post-racial and we don't see color and stuff, and they kind of laid down the sword a little bit. And then now there's this push in the US where you have these kind of like some groups where it's like let's pass laws that are explicitly racist but for our group, because like the US can only stabilize demographically once every single demographic kind of lays down its sword mutually and decides no one's going to be racist against everyone. But like every single ethnic group is going to have like a period of having fun being racist to like realize that there's downsides. So I feel like it's going to take like 100 years for it to get cleaned up.
That's a very interesting hypothesis. That's very cool. Yeah, I can see that happen definitely, because because it's it really is so complex, because it's what we were saying earlier, like it's all a matter of narratives, and people from North African descent living in Italy now, in southern Italy, they can claim there is racism and whatever, but they've been there forever. Like it's not like Libyans are now traveling to Italy for the first time in history.
Libyans were like Roman emperors. Like this is
and there was this like Cervantes, the writer of Don Quixote. He was a veteran of the Battle of Lepanto against the Turkish Navy, and on his way back, he was captured and he was made a slave. And he spent a few years as a slave in North Africa, and this was not like exceptional. Like there was a huge slave trade.
Venetian histories, like the Ottomans would capture a city and turn every single Venetian man, and they would kill all the men, they would turn all the women into Ottoman sex slaves, and then they would raise the children as like Muslim military soldiers. Yeah. This happened to millions of Europeans.
Yeah, and this happened like in like many villages and many towns in coastal Spain, in the Mediterranean coast, are not built next to the sea, but up in the mountains, because there were constant pirate raids that were exclusively used for the slave trade.
And I feel like part of it is I think like a lot of that narrative of kind of that there's something uniquely racist about the West, or kind of like something uniquely pernicious about kind of like slavery, like Western slavery. I think a lot of it's actually like a degree of historical illiteracy, that North Africa used to be awesome. Like it used to be rich, right? It's just like, but they don't realize just how fucking awesome North Africa is.
There were big players there, and the underdogs were completely different. So now you get these portrayals of the Crusades as an oppressive, just like a previous iteration of the slave trade across the Atlantic, and colonialism, and all these narratives that are just not applied. They do not apply to
right. Or the Crusades are more like a desperate last gasp of the declining power against the rising and superior power.
Yeah,
like the table.
yeah, they were like I'm sure they would not see it this way, the way we see it today. Like the people who took part in those events in history would be completely baffled by our interpretation of them.
Oh yeah, no, one of the most interesting things. There's a biography of this Venetian Doge, Foscari, who was kind of there for like one of the longest reigns of any Doge. He was there for like 40 years in the 1400s, and interestingly, it was between him and another guy, Pietro Loredan, and Loredan, he was basically an admiral, and it was almost like two video game characters where it's like you have like a pop up and it's like pick your focus tree. And like Loredan wanted to focus on the sea and the trade and counteract the Ottomans, put all their focus there, and then pick your focus. Foscari wanted to focus on the terra firma and kind of like annex more territory in the land. So they went to Foscari, who was a bit of a dick, and he was like a good administrator, but like bad strategically. So it was under his reign that Constantinople fell because of underinvestment, because of that Dogo election. So yeah. The thing that was so interesting is in this biography of him, they're talking about the news that was being reported if you were just an average Venetian who was literate at the time. And like the Ottoman conquest had been going on so long and so successfully, like it was believed that God was unhappy with Europe and that God was leaving the Europeans because, and like Jesus was leaving the Europeans because they had sinned so badly that they were giving land to the Ottomans.
And also there were Europeans were not a thing; they were Christendom. So like Middle Eastern Christians were were Christians, were not European, but they were on the side of Europeans, right?
Totally.
So it's very difficult to apply historical, like modern narratives to historical things.
Oh my God, yeah. A sense of deep history that we're talking about something that might feel old, like the 1400s. But like you go back to like so this is like the 1400s. You go back 1,000 years earlier, and you have Emperor Julian is in there, and he's going to war with the kind of the Persian Empire based in essentially modern Iraq, and he's dying there in the exact same battlefields and roughly the same borders. And then you're reading books about Julian in the 400s AD as emperor, and then he's writing about how it's like in his new modern time, he goes on a tourist trip in the eastern Mediterranean, and he's seeing the sights and he's seeing where like Homer went, and he's like these are all new cities, the ancient cities, those are over here. And it's just like it's there's no such thing as modern because every single civilization is modern. And like I feel like it's like the only thing that is unique, I feel like, about the present is there's, I think, a historically unique idea that we are the end of history. And there's like this like very normal, very standard, it's happened all times in the Middle Ages, an idea that we're in the end times, right? It's a very apocalyptic millenarian time because everyone's like, oh my God, climate change, AI, right? It's like shit always happens. Like the reality is like people are probably going to be here 2,000 years from now, and we're going to have a lot of dipshit wars. We're going to have some dark age that sets us back for 500. Like, it's going to be gnarly, but like, I just don't think there's anything unique about the present. I think like the next 100 years is probably going to be like just as batshit crazy as the last 100.
Yeah. I'm curious about what's going to happen in the future because I get asked very often if I would prefer to go back 200 years and live as a first, like with what I know, but 200 years ago, or if I'd rather travel into the future with what I know right now and see what the future holds. Because, I mean, there is what you say is true that there is this millenarian and spirit of the times right now. And it is also true that the power of the ability, how do I say this? The ability to destroy the world that we have now is not comparable to what they had in the Middle Ages, right? Like a total war now would maybe destroy the globe, and a total war in 500 years ago maybe could destroy a civilization that could not destroy the world in the same time.
We're living the timeline where that happened. Like I feel like the Mongols, they catapulted plague into cities. Like they spread it. Like I feel like essentially like the Mongols was runaway AI. Like it was a nuclear war, and the nuclear war happened and set back civilization hundreds of years. And like there's always like bullshit books about how like the Mongols were good for civilization, like horseshit. Like it's like a barbarian savages raped and pillaged their way through the entire planet, spread plague on purpose. And then at the end of the day, like the value added was they like policed the road for 50 years.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I haven't thought about it that way, and it's also true. And they actually like the Huns before the Mongols, they were the same thing, and they destroyed the Eastern Europe, the Roman Empire, and they were considered to be, as you said, the a scourge of God. And
They were,
yeah. So maybe it's not that bad.
Nuclear war. The Vandals were nuclear war.
Like maybe a huge nuclear conflict happens sometime in the future, but civilization will survive somewhere and they will start anew.
I think nuclear war will be less damaging than what we already survived with the Mongols and the Huns. Because like you think about the Mongols.
Yeah.
And like they like what they did to the Middle East. The only reason the Middle East is such a shithole is because they lost that war so thoroughly. Right? That's why the Middle East will continue to be a shithole. Is like the Mongols, like there'd been infrastructure there that went back to the times of Ur.
They burned everything down.
Yeah.
Really, like no, they left no stone standing.
Like it was 2,000 years.
And as we said earlier, we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
Like knowledge that is lost cannot be recovered. That's the definition of it being lost. Otherwise,
it's picturing how advanced. Like, have you read those takes on the not takes, but like the scale of Bronze Age cities? Hundreds of thousands of people, and like we don't think of that as being possible with that. So and like the size of the towers and everything, and then it's like, and then when Alexander the Great's army is going through it, they're seeing these walls, and this is just a couple hundred years later after the fall of Neo-Assyrians, and it's like they ask the locals who built those walls, and the locals give the wrong answer because they don't remember.
Yeah, they have no idea.
Nuclear war, bro.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
And like, I think it's like if when we do have, this is why like I'm not like millennial. Like I think there is going to be a nuclear war. Like obviously, right? There's no way we're going to get lucky for another for sure. So like there is going to be, but like
maybe it already happened that we don't know. Maybe we forgot.
What's that?
Maybe it already happened and we just simply don't know.
Oh my god, that'd be fucking.
Can you imagine? Right?
Yeah. It's like there's all these when they find those what was it when they find those comet strikes and it's a little bit radioactive, and then we have good evidence that like some kind of asteroid impacts are radioactive. It turns out it was just nukes.
Yeah, and it was just covered by the CIA or
thoughts involved. But yeah, no, it's like it'd be so unlikely to go 100 years without nuclear war. But it's also like it's in everyone's interest to have a limited exchange. Like the U.S. and China will like probably have a nuclear war, and like we'll lose New York and they'll lose Beijing, and we'll do some counterforce strikes. They'll take out our nukes. We'll take out their nukes. We'll take out some of their radar installations. We'll take out some of their radar installations. But like I would think that like in an actual war, the communication would actually be. I think a nuclear war would be less damaging than World War II, because World War II was like two parties punching the shit out of each other constantly. But like before you launch a nuclear strike, you need to announce what counterstrike you'll accept without going full, right? So it's like, because you use a nuke in this capacity against this army, then we are launching this, and we will accept this, but we'll try to shoot it the fuck down. But if you go beyond that line, we'll like eradicate your civilization for all time. And there's like there will be this. I think there would be like a very clear public communication, probably terrifyingly over Twitter, about what the acceptable things are.
Can you imagine? Right. Maybe I can see that happening. And like the civilization that that survives and thrives after that, it's going to have just like some selection of the features that ours has, and right, like if you destroy,
so like if we lost New York,
yeah, like we're going to New York and then Philadelphia and all the East Coast and all the West Coast too. So
that makes sense.
Is small towns in Kentucky. So those are the keepers of civilization. So when they conquer the world again, they're like it's going to be a very different world because it's going to emanate from Kentucky.
Great point. That's a great point because it's like the U.S. is made of a lot of different cultural centers, and some of them get obliterated. Yep.
Yeah,
and that for all the purposes, like it does feel like Europe is essentially out of the doghouse on serious war. Part of it's that I bet like if there was ever a real threat of war, it feels like Europe would surrender relatively quickly before there was a lot of damage.
I don't know because you see the French like the French are in some serious shit in Africa.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like real wars, like real war operations where they drop paratroopers and they launch big land operations with support and air support, and they're not docile at all.
Yeah, it's hard for any attack on Europe to kind of like get to the point of France. Like, but I mean, you're right. It's like wars that they're doing right now.
Why would you invade Europe for? Like, what is there that anybody would want?
I honestly think that I think there's a lot of talent, and I think one of the things that we've learned from the wars so far, like kind of in the past like 20, 30 years, like even like the Syrian civil war, it's surprising how few people can get out early.
Yeah, but and you don't need to to have a war to exploit that talent.
I think you do because I think it's like Russia doesn't have a way to upgrade its talent pool. Like it's Russia right now has like the worst of all worlds. It's authoritarian enough that people want to leave, and it is weak and liberal enough that it lets people leave. So it's right. It's like pick one. So like so you imagine like a context where like Russia, like let's say kind of Zeihan's right about kind of Russia's reconquest of Eastern Europe, like that talent pool would mean that Russian companies would stop sucking and they would actually be competitive, because it's like, and especially within the Russia, like Russia's it's authoritarian light, like you can build they would need to reduce the corruption level down, and I feel like that's like the real issue is like the VCon cake guy, like that, like they seize the social network and hand it to a political crony. But you don't need to reduce the corruption that much to allow Russian companies to be competitive internationally.
Corruption is not necessarily bad for a country.
No, the US needs more corruption. Yeah, no, I'm very pro-corruption in the US.
Like Italy or Spain or places like that are super corrupt. And they function.
Yeah, and like in the US, it's like we have so many rules to prevent corruption. We're incapable of making decisions. So like it would be way better to have more bribery just because we would make decisions faster.
Yeah. And the point of corruption is that everybody benefits from it. Because otherwise it's just poorly planned crime.
True. That's such an interesting point. So corruption to be continuous, you're right, it's a service.
Yeah, I mean it's like they do what you cannot do in the light.
Right. And if it's unacceptable to any given party, then it'll end.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can have clumsy corruption, and that obviously is negative, but it's not because it's corruption, but it's because it's clumsy.
It's incompetent corruption.
Yeah, it's incompetent.
What just kind of like over in the next bit, like just any like topics or just kind of any things that you think that like, or that'd be kind of like fun to circle back on, or things you would like to kind of bring up?
I don't know. Like maybe we should do like a summary of the conversation.
Yeah.
You mean like to wrap it up? I know. I think the most important thing is to realize first that when we're talking about these subject of geopolitics and world power politics is the narrative issue. Like stories, they don't necessarily have to be exhaustive, and they don't necessarily have to cover everything, but they need to make sense internally. And once you have an internally coherent story, then you can use it, to justify policies to yourself, and coherent policies with your narrative. And if your narrative is well constructed and somewhat loyal to reality, then you're going to have a certain amount of success.
Love that. Yep. And that history is so deep. Like it's every regime chooses which of those narratives it keeps in the public consciousness, because in the same way that like in our own lives, it's like we choose what memories we give meaning and what kind of life experiences we kind of keep at the top of our mind versus what shit we repress or don't think about or give less meaning. Like regimes do the same thing. So it's like in the US, it's like we like to think that the world began when we were founded, except for the Romans, who were totally tied to. And then everything else is gone because none of the other narratives are useful. But like it's been going so long, but no current regime talks about the Bronze Age civilizations because it's not useful to anyone's narrative. It's a pro Middle East narrative and it's not useful.
Yeah, and that's why I'm interested in memetics as a discipline, because this is basically memetics at play in politics.
Yeah, and it can be a source of power too, because it's the concept of memetics is very early, and it's not a science. It's kind of a theory right now, but it seems very likely that it'll turn into a science over time, because you can actually quantify how often people are repeating narratives. You can detect narratives being used on media algorithmically. So it should be possible to actually kind of fine tune national narratives. So it's kind of like right now we're living through like a period of very, very low state power because no narratives are believed. And then what will happen is when the new regime comes, the new regime will be smart to be able to kind of actually maintain a national narrative, because like no state can last without a national narrative.
Yeah, that's what like the people in the thinkers, like Justin Murphy, were saying about this being a golden era for cults.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's like it's completely on point.
Totally agree. Totally agree. But
so we'll see.
We'll see.
I think we should do this again.
That'd be awesome. I'd love to.
Yeah, and we have to like plan specific topics and announce it, and
I like that.
It's fun.
Yeah, no, that was super fun. No, and I like, and it's also like it's also kind of like it's this is the first time doing a podcast kind of thing. But like I like the format. It's also like, I don't know about you, but it's very cool just to do like a long geopolitics-y kind of talk. Like it's really fun about doing a focused discussion like that. Yeah,
because it's like it's like you're having a conversation of whatever comes to your mind, but it's restricted to a certain topic, so it's like you don't drift and talk about football, and it's like, so it's productive but fun at the same time. And I guess there is an audience, so
yeah, right. So it makes it interesting. That's super awesome, dude. This is super fun. Let's totally do this again.
Okay, nice to meet you, by the way.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, because we just talked over Twitter. Yeah,
we never really saw each other, so
yeah, awesome.
Okay,
good shit, dude. All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah,
everyone. All right, peace.